You're hungry, not miss lunch hungry, not keto diet hungry. No, this is the kind of hunger that chews at your ribs, turns your stomach inside out, and makes your brain whisper things like, maybe that moss looks tasty? Welcome to the Middle Ages. A world where food wasn't guaranteed, famine was routine, and desperation turned whole villages into foragers of tree bark, weeds, and whatever crawled across the ground. Forget DoorDash, forget grocery stores, forget even the comfort of bread because bread itself could betray you. And while you sit there with your fridge humming in the background, stocked with leftovers you'll probably throw away. Imagine facing a winter where your only option was boiling grass into a gray soup, or grinding oak bark into something vaguely bread-shaped. So, did medieval people really eat grass and bark? Oh yes, and the story only gets darker from here. 1. The Great Hunger, when dinner meant anything. You wake up hungry, not peckish, not craving a mid-morning snack. This is the kind of hunger that makes your stomach feel like it's turning inside out. And in the Middle Ages, that feeling wasn't rare, it was routine. All it took was one wet summer, one crop failure, or one greedy lord stockpiling grain, and suddenly the whole village was starving. Famine wasn't some shocking event that made headlines. It was a cycle, a guest at the table that never left. And when the hunger came, you didn't get picky. Forget about fresh vegetables or clean protein. You ate what was there: rats, snails, nettles, even the bark stripped from a tree. Monks and chroniclers wrote about people boiling leather belts to soften them enough to chew. Others clawed at the ground, eating weeds or dirt just to trick their bodies into thinking something had gone down the hatch. The terrifying part, hunger doesn't care about your dignity. You can start noble, refusing filth, clinging to pride. But pride burns away faster than firewood by the second week. The smell of a dead animal on the road makes your mouth water by the third. You're looking at things you swore you'd never touch and thinking, maybe just a bite. And this wasn't a rare apocalypse moment. Between 1315 and 1317, Europe suffered what's now called the Great Famine. Crops failed across the continent, whole families wasted away. Chroniclers described corpses lying in the streets, unburied because no one had the strength. Parents abandoned children. People scoured ponds for frogs and chewed on the roots of hedges. For 2 years, desperation was the daily menu. Modern you worries about carbs. Medieval you would have sold your soul for them. Hunger wasn't the exception, it was the rule. And it forced people into a diet that makes keto look like a 5-star buffet. But if hunger pushed you to eat garbage, it got even worse when the food you did find turned out to be your enemy. 2. Why even the bread wanted you dead? Bread, the so-called staff of life in the Middle Ages. It was the cornerstone of the diet for peasants. Bread could make up 60 to 70% of daily calories. But here's the catch, bread wasn't the safe, fluffy comfort food you know today. In fact, sometimes it kills you. Start with quality. Grain was often stretched with whatever the miller could sweep off the floor. Bean flour, wheats, acorns, or sawdust. Yes, actual sawdust. Think of it as the medieval version of gluten-free alternatives, except instead of being a lifestyle choice, it was the difference between eating and starving. The resulting loaf was hard, dense, and sometimes more brick than bread. Then there was mold. Grain wasn't stored in climate-controlled silos. It sat in damp barns, chewed by rats, soaked by rain. Spoilage was inevitable, and when rye caught a certain fungus circuit, the consequences were horrific. Eat infected bread and you might start hallucinating, then convulsing, then watching your hands or feet turn black as gangrene set in. This wasn't rare. Outbreaks of St. Anthony's fire, as it was called, swept through villages in 944 in France. As many as 40,000 people may have died from a single mass poisoning. Ergotism didn't just kill, it warped reality. People described swarms of snakes biting at their flesh, or their skin burning as if on fire. And that's just from a couple slices of bread. Meanwhile, the bread itself didn't exactly win beauty contests. Forget soft golden crusts, forget Instagram-worthy sourdough. Medieval bread was dark, heavy, and often gritty with bits of husk or stone from the millstones. You didn't cut it so much as hack it apart, and chewing it wore down your teeth like sandpaper. So yes, bread keeps you alive, But it was a gamble every single time. One meal might keep you standing. The next could send you into seizures, screaming about demons, before your limbs rotted off, and that was good food. Because of the bad food, that was soup, if you can even call it that. 3. Soup that wasn't soup, boiling weeds and grass. Close your eyes and imagine dinner in a medieval hut. A pot simmers over the fire, steam rises, you lean in, hoping for meat, maybe even vegetables, but when you peer inside, the disappointment hits. It's grass. Welcome to medieval soup, grass, nettles. Dandelion leaves, whatever could be yanked from the roadside or pulled from a ditch. Villagers boiled them with water. Maybe a pinch of salt if they were lucky. The result, a thin, bitter broth that filled the stomach without feeding it. Chroniclers described it politely as gruel. You'd probably call it swamp tea. This wasn't a trendy detox cleanse. This was survival. The soup didn't give you energy. It just tricked your body into feeling like it had something to digest. And sometimes it did the opposite, because not all plants are safe. Desperate foragers couldn't always tell the difference between an edible weed and a toxic one. Eat the wrong leaf, and instead of buying time, you'd be doubled over, vomiting until you couldn't move. Still, when the choice was grass or nothing, grass won. Accounts from famines mention people boiling roots, leaves, even moss scraped from stones. Families huddled around smoky fires, drinking bowls of bitter liquid and pretending it was food. And the worst part, you'd keep going back for more. Hunger erases memory fast. You could spend the night retching, and by morning you'd still drink another bowl, because the alternative was empty silence in your stomach. Modern diets talk about eating clean. Medieval diets were literally eating the ground clean. Anything green that grew was fair game. Some villages even relied on nettle soup so much that it became a staple in folk tradition. Still cooked today in parts of Europe, though now it's marketed as rustic heritage cuisine. Back then, it was desperation in a bowl. And just when you think things couldn't get more desperate than grass water, they started baking bread out of trees. 4. The bark bread experiment nobody wanted. You've run out of grain. The fields failed, the barns are empty, your family is starving. So you turn to the one thing still standing outside your door. Trees. Yes, bark. Oak, birch, pine. Stripped from the trunk, dried, ground down into powder, then mixed with a little flour, if you had any left. The result, bark bread. It looked like bread. It even baked like bread. But that's where the similarities stopped. This wasn't food. It was filler with fibers, bitter and black, with the nutritional value of chewing cardboard. Eating it gives you bulk in the stomach, but no real energy. Chroniclers wrote of people swelling with bark bread, their bellies full, their bodies still starving. In the worst cases, they died with their stomachs packed solid. Imagine choking down slice after slice, knowing it wouldn't save you, only delay the inevitable. And yet, during the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317, whole regions relied on it. Rain ruined crops for 3 straight summers. Grain prices soared, tripling in some areas. The poor were left scavenging forests for trees that could grind into loaves. The taste, bitter, woody, impossible to chew. Accounts describe it as nearly inedible, but when hunger claws at you, bitterness is just another flavor. You, sitting comfortably in your kitchen, might throw a fit if your sourdough crust comes out too tough. Medieval peasants didn't have that luxury. They were chewing oak trees like granola bars. Bon appetit. And if barking bread sounds grim, don't worry, because if you were lucky enough to get meat, things somehow got even worse. 5. Rotten meat, crawling guests, and a smile. Picture this. Someone hands you meat, you should feel lucky. But then the smell hits, sour, rancid. The flesh isn't pink, it's gray, and when you poke it, it wriggles. Welcome to dinner. Meat was precious in the Middle Ages. Preservation meant salting, smoking, or drying. But salt was expensive if you were poor. You didn't have that luxury. You took what you could find. Scraps, carrion, or cuts already spoiling. If it crawled with maggots, you simply brushed them off. Maybe rinse the chunk in water, then cook it until the smell dulled enough to swallow. Congratulations, it's edible. Meanwhile, the wealthy sat at long tables tearing into roasted venison, pork, and poultry, their scraps, the bones, fat, and gristle were tossed aside. Those scraps were a banquet for the poor. Food safety wasn't a concept. Expiration dates weren't a thing. The only question was, could you get it down before the rats did? And here's the irony. Sometimes rotten meat was actually safer. Cooking kills off bacteria, while fresh but undercooked meat could leave you with parasites or worse. Maggots themselves, mostly harmless protein. Not appetizing, but survivable. People even joke that the meat came with garnish. Your modern fridge beeps at you if you leave the door open. Medieval meat storage was whatever hook you could find to hang it on, usually in a smoke-filled hut buzzing with flies by the time you tore into it. It was aged in the worst possible way. Still, when your stomach's been empty for 3 days, you don't flinch. Hungry raises disgust. You eat, you smile, you thank God for the meal, because in this world, even rotten meat was a blessing. But if food itself could betray you, the explanations people gave for famine and hunger took things to an even stranger level. 6. Starvation superstitions, God, sin, and punishment. You're starving, you've boiled bark. You've chewed grass, you've eaten meat that twitched. But you still can't shake the question, why is this happening in the Middle Ages? The answer wasn't weather patterns or crop rotation. It was God. Hunger was seen as divine punishment for sin. Famine wasn't random, it was a message, and the clergy made sure you understood it loud and clear. Preachers thundered that starvation was a test of faith. Processions of barefoot villagers shuffled through muddy streets, whipping their backs raw in hopes of forgiveness. Families donated what little bread they had to the church, believing it might buy mercy from above. Meanwhile, inside the cathedral walls, the priests dined well, rulers used hunger too. Grain was hoarded to raise prices, starving peasants into submission in France. During the 1315 famine, entire communities begged for mercy while nobles threw feasts. To the poor, the injustice must have felt cosmic. And when prayers failed, people searched for someone to blame. Rumors spread that witches cursed the crops, that Jews poisoned the wells. Fear and desperation turned neighbor against neighbor. Starvation didn't just devour bodies. It corroded trust, breeding suspicion and violence. You'd kneel, stomach hollow, praying to heaven for bread, but the sky stayed silent. And silence drove people to madness, because nothing gnaws at the mind like hunger. But worse still, when food finally appeared, it often came with a price your body couldn't pay. 7. Plagues of the stomach, ergot, parasites, and worse. You think food poisoning is bad when you spend one night hugging the toilet after bad sushi. In the Middle Ages, that wasn't a freak accident. That was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Every bite you swallowed was basically a game of dice with death. Start with meat and fish, unless you were rich enough to afford fresh cuts. Your dinner was probably salted to the point of petrification, or left to rot until it practically walked to the table by itself. Parasites thrived in this stuff. Tiny worms burrowing into your gut where they would stay for months, even years, happily eating what little nutrition you scraped together. You didn't need to catch a stomach bug. You carried one permanently. And if you thought bread was safe, think again. The same fields that fed you were also breeding grounds for ergot fungus, a mold that grew on rye. Eat too much of it, and suddenly your body wasn't your own. Fingers blackened and fell off. Legs cramped and twisted until you looked like a puppet pulled by cruel strings. Whole villages reported mass hallucinations, people screaming that demons dragged them into hell. Some historians even think ergot poisoning might have sparked witch panics. Imagine starving, then choking down bread, only for the bread to eat you back. Water didn't save you either. Streams doubled as laundries, sewers, and sometimes graveyards. You drink it because you're desperate, and within hours you're doubled over with dysentery, vomiting out one end while everything else rushes out the other. In a world where hydration was life, clean water was fantasy. The irony, you could still die from overeating. A belly full of contaminated food didn't mean survival. It meant a slow, sweaty decline, curled up on damp straw, praying your stomach stopped twisting before it killed you. Your gut wasn't a digestive system, it was a war zone. And no matter how many times you fought, you almost always lost. 8. Cannibalism and the edge of desperation. Now picture this, you've gone days without a real meal. The bark bread is gone, the grain stores are empty. Even the rats are too thin to bother catching. At first, you chew grass, then roots, then leather, boiled into a tasteless soup, and then you look at something you swore you'd never consider: flesh. Chronicles from the Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 whisper the same stories. Parents abandoning their children because they couldn't feed them. Corpses vanishing from graveyards dug up under the cover of night. Even darker rumors of people carving meat from the bodies of those who hadn't been dead long. You want to dismiss it as medieval exaggeration, but famine doesn't care about morality. Hunger strips away everything until only the most brutal instinct remains: survive. Imagine standing over a corpse. The smell of decay stings your nose, but your stomach twists harder. You're not thinking about heaven or hell, you're thinking about calories. You're calculating how long this body might keep you alive, even though you know it's only putting off the inevitable. That's not food, that despair turned solid. Historians can't agree on how widespread it was, maybe rare, maybe common. But the fact it was written down at all speaks volumes. People remembered it not as rumor, but as horror, something they couldn't unsee. Something that branded an entire generation with shame. And before you clutch your pearls in disgust, ask yourself, how long would you last before that line blurred? How many days of emptiness until your morality eroded like the bark you gnawed yesterday? Hunger isn't rational, it doesn't negotiate. It eats you alive from the inside until you'll do anything to quiet it. In those moments, humanity wasn't lost. It was traded for one more day. 9. The luxury of waste. Why your trash would shock them. Now leave the famine behind for a moment and open your kitchen bin. Go ahead, look inside. Wilted spinach, half a sandwich, a forgotten yogurt that expired last week. Trash, right, to you. It's nothing to a medieval peasant. It's a feast. Waste didn't exist in their world. Not because people were virtuous recyclers, but because throwing food away was the same as throwing away your life. Every crumb mattered. If bread hardened, you soaked it in broth until it was edible again. If meat rotted, you scraped off the worst bits and cooked the rest. Even bones weren't wasted. They were boiled into thin soups to stretch flavor into one more meal. To leave food uneaten was unthinkable. Now imagine showing a medieval villager the leftovers you scrape into the bin after dinner. Pizza crusts, fries gone soggy, salad that doesn't taste fresh anymore. They'd stare at you like you were insane. That garbage could keep their family alive for a week. Even the moldy stuff would be reborn as stew. The irony is sharp. Today, people starve themselves on purpose. Diet culture encourages skipping meals, counting calories, and cutting carbs. In the Middle Ages, the only counting done was how many mouths could share a single loaf. You worrying about overeating. They worried about eating at all. If you live in a city, you've probably thrown away more calories this week than a medieval peasant consumed in an entire month of famine. Your bins would look like treasure chests. Your leftovers would seem like royal banquets, and you wouldn't just shock them. You defend them because to their eyes, your waste is proof you live in a world so abundant you've forgotten the value of survival itself. And that's the cruel punchline. Their famine is your convenience. Their bark bread is your stale breadsticks. The line between life and death then is the same thing you casually scrape off your plate today. If this dive into medieval hunger made you grateful for leftovers, hit like and subscribe because history only gets darker from here.